The Greasy Spoon was conceived to be the anti-gala. There's no democracy of being able to access advocacy. So you would have the $500 white tablecloth Maserati in the front of the hotel thing, but nobody ever left there an advocate. And the other side of that coin is in the advocacy space, there's no resource to generate. So it'd be like, here's a hot dog boil at the last minute in the park, and there wasn't a space in between to educate the average person. This is what's going on in our city. And at the same time, to be able to bring in chefs to really share their gift on their terms. Seeing the impact of the advocacy work on the general population, from arts, musicians, etc., being able to see themselves in the work, being able to enjoy an incredible meal, but become part of a bigger community is what I'm about.
So I wanted to show that video really quickly because I remember being outside, and being outside is the best. This is my first talk in front of people, so I want to say how thankful I am for friends and individuals who've traveled so far to share messages today. Of course, to acknowledge the Mi'kmaq lands that we are on. And the bulk of my presentation today will be about the unceded and stolen lands of the Musqueam, Snohomish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I'm a little impacted coming up here because I grew up on the other side of the bridge in a place called Dartmouth. I don't know if you all are familiar with it. It's a long haul from here. One of those bridges works sometimes. I walked from my hotel up past the library. For those of you who are coming in remotely, we're about 73 steps from the library, not that I was counting. And there were people being fed there today who were unhoused. And I was here about 5 weeks ago when there was 2,500 people downtown, some of who got bear sprayed by police officers because walking by that every day became too much for them to bear. Maritimers don't turn their back on people. It's not what we do. My work, while it isn't predominantly in Vancouver, it also spans globally. I work with the United Nations as a catalyst on food sovereignty. But what I really care about is poverty more than anything, and I think homelessness is a symptom, and we, as a community, walk through those symptoms every day. That prompt was for me to breathe because I talk too fast. I want you to think about this. A lot of the work that we've been doing here today, just for some framing, is I blew up my presentation about an hour and 25 minutes ago and started again. So thank you to the AV team for being so gracious. We use a lot of our reptilian brain, but there's only so much we can take in a day. And when we go through so many statistics and so much, and all of it matters so much, qualitative and quantitative data, when they marry, are the most important thing for advocacy in the world. They can't be siloed. You can't have qual without quant. If there's no story with data to back it up, nobody knows what to do. But at some point, we got to talk about the heart, so I'm going to do that today. What I want you to do personally, whether you're with us digitally or you're here, is somebody's already come to mind. You already know who that is. If they are still with us, send them a note today. Randomly, it'll feel like text, email, call them, voice note. If they're no longer with us, send the energy. It's so important, and I think especially with the work that you're in, if you're here personally or you're tuning in, often the strongest people get ignored the most. They're fine, they're doing okay, so check in on them. This is something I say every single day, you just heard me say it. If the community's unwell, we're all unwell. When you walk past the public library and you see 40, 50, 60 people incensed, but more importantly, you see people who you don't know where they're going, you can compartmentalize that, you can stuff it. We do very well as humans compartmentalizing, but at some point it overflows, and at some point it's going to hurt you. I work in New York City, I work in all 5 boroughs. I have a foundation called the Better Life Foundation, founded in Vancouver, but now we work North America wide. And I work predominantly right now in Brownsville, which is Brooklyn, and it's one of the most marginalized zip codes on the planet. When we talk about people, we talk about other versus us. And the disconnection that Jen talked about this morning so beautifully, in that we are all connected. So when you work in neighborhoods that are heavily marginalized, we are part of that. And I hope that that makes sense. If you are taking the train, or you're taking the ferry, or you're walking through the library, everything that you're seeing is impacting your parasympathetic, it's impacting your mind, it's impacting the way that you react and interact with every individual you see. From that moment on, unless you can release that tension, it is very, very challenging. So what I try to do in design, one of my other hats is I'm a professor of innovation dynamics and design thinking. I care deeply about systems change. But at the center of systems change is love. Period, point blank. We can talk about everything else we want, but without the greatest motivator, which is love, none of this stuff works. I've been in it a long time. This quote strikes me every time I see somebody, a lot of leaders who are afraid to speak in emotion. They feign it. They're trained so well to fake it. I feel it would take less energy just to do the real thing. But this was said by this guy. I had the distinct opportunity and pleasure to be in Attica prison with his grandson, who runs an organization that's anti-violence. And violence isn't just physical violence. Violence is emotional violence, verbal violence. And he had us do something that I wanted us to do today, but of course, since we can't touch each other, we can't. So I'm standing in a maximum security prison, one of the hardest in the world, and he has all of us stand next to each other and do an exercise. And the exercise is hold your hand as tightly clenched as you can, and the person next to you, I'm going to give you 5 seconds to get it open. So we're with people who are doing life, we're with other speakers, and of course the place erupts into play. But all of the play is trying to tear the hand open. And then he looks to me, and I have my hand clenched, and he says, "Would you please open your hand?" And of course I immediately do it. He said, "We're hardwired to be violent. We don't want to be, but we don't have the conversation. We just fight." Poverty is an act of violence. It's one we choose as a society. We have chosen to participate in it. As cities, as people, we enact it every single day. It's also completely and utterly unnecessary. We have everything we need and more. We heard it 15 times already today, much to my delight, by the way. I was sitting in the back snapping and fist pumping, distracting the speakers. I'm sorry, but not really. The community's unwell. We're all unwell. And if we are perpetuating the systems, colonial, capitalism systems that continue to make people poor, poor of community, not just money, poor of access. You don't have the luxury to do this if you're in poverty. The fact that we allow this to happen domestically is so crazy to me. And it's not just the guy with the dog and the cigarette stain mustache. We're seeing it. It's families, it's kids. It's largely, unfortunately, people of color, Indigenous folks who we serve predominantly in Vancouver. I'm just going to say it again because I think it's important. The community's unwell. We're all unwell. This is from 74 steps outside this door. If you're in charge of a city and people in that city cannot afford to live indoors, you're doing an extremely bad job. Correct. We want it to be complex. Sometimes it's not. This is where I've spent the last sort of 10 years of my life in research. I lived for a year in San Francisco and worked every day almost in the Mission and Tenderloin district, which looks like the downtown east side of Vancouver. I also spent weeks in Skid Row. I was a Stanford Fellow, which sounds ostentatious because it sounds ostentatious. But I was actually at the D School, the design school, doing a project specifically on technology and poverty. And I was being pushed into looking more into technology. And I thought, we're pretty amazing. I would rather study resiliency and understand what people have actually gone through. San Francisco had just established a Department of Homelessness, which, just to continue the disrespect and depth of this work, it was kind of in a closet in City Hall. By kind of in a closet, I mean it was next to a closet in a very small space. And I got to working with data, and I worked with a company called Domo. I can share that stuff on my socials later if you're interested. Domo is one of the biggest data visualization companies in the world that do aggregate work. So they use AI to pull out data. And I said, can we do this for homelessness? And they said, oh yeah, we could. So we started to aggregate all the data around homelessness and put it into pie charts and challenge municipal leaders on it. And so I'm gonna boil this down because I think it's really just good for it to stick. It costs an average of 3 to 5 times more money to keep someone homeless than it does to house them. We choose violence. We choose violence. We live with abundance. So to end homelessness, and this is the US stat, so let's call it a 10th for Canada, all right? Just at a swath. And when we talked and heard about data earlier, and we heard the census from 2018, I mean, when we hear these 2021 numbers, it's gonna be nuts. But also when we study homelessness, when we do a homeless count in Vancouver per se, we use clipboards and we go out in the street and we count people. I don't have to say too much more about why that data might be wrong, but let's say that the end cost for the numbers that were wrong was $20 billion to house every single human being in the US. Give them their homes. You own this. This is your house. So let's say the stats are wrong and just be super generous and double it to 40 billion. This from the National Alliance to End Homelessness is one of my favorite slides that's ever existed. And I don't like slides. So 40 billion is the second number up there on the scale. The taxpayer subsidies for the oil industry for 1 year would do that work. So let's call it 2. The one that I love here is the amount Americans will spend on Christmas decorations and flowers in a year would house everybody. But it costs 3 to 5 times more to keep people unhoused. Stuff is not as complex as they'd like you to believe. It looks like this. The community's unwell, we're all unwell. Nobody can drive by this and be okay. I've worked in the downtown east side since 2006. I live there. Oppenheimer Park that was talked about earlier is 3 blocks from my home. I look out a window at Crab Park where indigenous people are camping and being removed forcibly from land that's theirs, that they're the shepherds of. And you want me to be a productive member of society. I would be okay in assuming, what the fuck? Poverty, still an unnecessary act of violence. All right, this is where it moves into a little bit more upbeat, so thank you for bearing with me. I'm also a chef. I love cooking. I get to be a cook for a lot of people. I get to be the chef for the 2017 Laudato Si Challenge for the Pope at the Vatican. I get to be the chef for the American Refugee Committee at times. I work with the Future Food Institute. And I tell you this because I get to host big dinners with people who can actually make change and talk like this, which is great for me because I don't have to pretend. Waste became a big focus for me during the pandemic. We do about 1,400 meals a day right now out of Vancouver. Now, those are scratch-made meals that go out to our partners, BC Housing, who Stephanie is representing today. They partner with another organization, a Women's Resource Society, who we've worked with since 2011 or 12. We put out 3.5 million meals with them, plus. I am not a government agency. I started a business because I care about people, and I thought there'd be different ways to do things. But when we ran out of the funding that we do have to feed people and people are still hungry, how do we best go about it? And everybody immediately says waste. How many conversations have we all been in where it's like, what are we doing with this waste food? There's 3 billion tons of it a year, I'm told. There is. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's challenging. But I feel like there's more reasons why it shouldn't be. And so with that same lens, like, how can we get this food that's being wasted into people who are starving today? It's not like we have to make it and store it, we just get it right to them. And I called myself out because often I'll speak about this stuff and work on it globally, but not work on it in my own backyard. And this is from a dinner that we did for the United Nations in New York City, before, obviously, pre-pandemic, with waste food. And I was trying to prove a point, which I think I proved. We invited 100 delegates around the General Assembly to a maker space, and I took waste food from a waste food company. So I think you're all familiar with the CSA boxes that are now ugly food, and all the cool kids buy them and have them delivered because they're like, look how ugly my carrot is, but I can do this. I asked them for their garbage for the dinner. And they were like, you know what we do, right? I was like, I'm fully aware. Please bring me your garbage. So I got rotten pineapples and all sorts of other stuff. But of course, there's goodness in that. And in this makerspace, these waffles here are dehydrated corn husks that were broken down and then put into a dehydrator with a little bit of maple syrup that I brought with me and ended up being delicious. And this is a final plate here. So we had old cauliflower and some watermelon, some mint. Most of it was brown in the bunches, and I pulled stuff out. And I did a take on chicken and waffles for these folks. People were having seconds, thirds. And when it was my turn to get up and speak, I said, how did you enjoy dinner? There was 5 courses like this. Everyone's like, it was beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm like, really? It was all garbage. People in suits being like, great, what do you mean? Like you dug it out of the garbage? They're not sure. Like, it would have been. It could have been. But with the right hands, if we know how to use food, without our judgment of it can't have a brown speck on it, we can actually do incredible work. I think this stuff matters. I think it's important. But we've stopped teaching and learning how to cook and interact with our systems personally. People don't know how. We grow up on bags, cans, things that come in cardboard boxes versus access to real food. And so when we were thinking about what to do with waste during the pandemic, waste, nobody wants to eat. Imagine saying to somebody, hey, I know you're staying in shelter and life's pretty tough right now, but I'm gonna bring you some waste food to eat. So we started saying leftovers. We're like, we got some delicious leftovers if anybody's interested. Everybody loves leftovers. I love leftovers. Food gets better after a day. And they look like this. These are our individual containers that we do, like I said, 1,400 plus a day of. They are actually fully biodegradable, by the way, because we couldn't put together the system and then say, oh, and here's styrofoam or here's plastic. So these go out, and you can see, just from the portioning, this is a picture from yesterday. We have a WhatsApp group where this stuff gets shared every day. Chefs make this food. They make it beautiful. When you pop the top, the aromatics are there, it's levels of flavor, there's crunch, there's soft, there's all kinds of stuff because real cooks make it, and they care about it. In my neighborhood, when I used to walk around as a traditional restaurateur before doing nonprofit stuff in my charity, there'd be styrofoam cups all over the street full of what looked like cat food. And it took me years to figure out that that's what people were being served to eat. Imagine you're living in an 8x10 or in a shelter already, struggling to make sense of it all, and you get served a styrofoam cup of garbage. So this program, I partnered with 3 grocery stores. We already deliver our meals via electric tricycle with a group called Shift, who I adore. And I said, could you make 2 more stops, like when you're delivering, and then bring the food back? They said, yes, we can. And so we started getting stuff from grocery stores and reimagined it with 1 cook, because we didn't have any budget, the electric trike, and a sorter, and a tech partner called Food Mesh, so we could count. Qualitative, quantitative, it matters. So this is as of 2 days ago. Over 13 months, we've done 23 tons of recovery food, which is 55,000 kilograms in offsets, because we're still melting, and an average of 172 extra meals a day that we didn't have to pay for, because we don't have any more money. 3 people do this. We didn't build an app or do a series of fundraising. We just got people who care together to do the work. This is my executive chef. Her name is Vanessa Watersworth. She's of the Squamish Nation. She's been with us for 4 years and leads my kitchen. This is why we do the work. Joy is in this. This can't just be numbers. We love our neighborhood. We love our communities. We show them we love them. Vanessa's from our community. So I'm going to run through the rest really quickly so we can make time for networking here and also for the next panel. I've got a million more things to say, but luckily I get to come back here a couple times a year and speak. This is really important to me. You as individuals know this now after spending the last 18 months. A lot of us in our own heads. Whew, this is what people who face being unhoused deal with daily. Oh, why can't they just get off drugs? Oh my God. We created this during the pandemic. I'll do this quickly, called Sharpen Up, because I couldn't get into schools and teach people or into community centers and teach people with my chefs across America and Canada. We created a digital thing. I'm like, I'm getting my groceries delivered. I'm on Zoom calls every day. I hate that, all of it. But what if we flipped it? So we reached out to our community partners, did 30 families at a time, asked them what they wanted. What do you feel like cooking? What do you like? What do you not like? What's culturally appropriate? What are you allergic to? And delivered groceries based on that and taught kids from 5 to 15 as the center point of their family, with their families too, how to cook. It's really easy. And they're super proud. And they'd share their dishes with us. And this kept me sane during the pandemic. We managed to teach just under 4,000 people. This is what's really important in these times. How do we create this so we don't see 2,500 people being pepper sprayed? If we can have conversations, hard ones. It's okay to have hard ones. You got to create spaces to do that. This was a question I would get the most, and so I designed for it. When you get asked something over and over and over again, instead of getting frustrated, you look at that and you design for it. Can I cook with you? No, you can't. Do you know how to cook? I don't. How is that helpful to me? It's not. But people want to learn how to cook. So we created another thing because I really wanted to build advocates. Not just how to cook, but I want to build advocates every day. I want you to know how to engage this work, not just the people up here, everybody. Because then things change. So I said, yeah, you can come cook with us for a donation, and you have to serve as well in my diner. So people would come and learn to cook for $75, print out menus, predominantly around indigenous food and systems, because that's who we serve. And they would set up the diner and serve folks, some of whom had never had a restaurant meal, some of whom weren't invited into much. The unintended consequences when you design something beautiful is where I'll wrap up here. This is my friend Football Mike on the left, one of my best friends. In the center, Justin Van Westen, who lived in the street for 7+ years, is now an overdose prevention officer, so he walks around with Narcan in the alleyways and brings people back to life who are suffering from the poison drug supply. He's an amazing human being. I love these dudes. Justin helps curate the people for these Plenty of Plates things I was just discussing. And he sent me an email, and I'll read it to you. It says, hey, Mark, I just wanted to say thank you to your team for being amazing and supportive to the community. I'm working on looking at what it means to honor relationships for those in the community. Cool, I'm with you. Relationships are not honored, especially in our homeless population. Hell yeah, I'll say it louder. I remember when Una, his wife, and I started a relationship and never had a date for the first 4 years because they were both living in the street. At this point, my ears are really perked. So where I'm going with this is that I have 3 couples coming to Plenty of Plates tonight, and this is a game changer for these people being honored in their relationship. Thank you so much for building the capacity and making space. What? Right. Just because you live unhoused doesn't mean that you don't have love. There's no space for this. We're the #1 date spot. There's no Yelp reviews, but I don't need them. Radical inclusion and radical hospitality. Build spaces so everybody can be seen. These are 2 people who served in that diner. They are trans drag queens. They didn't have a space to perform, so we gave them the diner. 300 people lined up down the street of the downtown east side, saw the neighborhood, arguably for the first time, to see these beautiful humans do what they do. Radical hospitality and inclusivity are so important when building spaces. Don't make it for one thing. Let it become exactly what it's supposed to be. We're going to skip this. And I'm going to read this quote, and I promise to finish. Bad food is made without pride by cooks who have no pride and no love. We can change food to pretty much anything. The analogy will stay. Bad food is made by chefs who are indifferent or who are trying to be everything to everybody, who are trying to please everyone. Bad food is fake food. Food that shows fear and lack of confidence in people's ability to discern or to make decisions about their own lives. About their own lives. Assumption sucks. I was said by this guy, also this guy. 1 in 4 people suffer from some type of mental illness. That means it's normal. Check in on your friends. This work is hard. It takes its toll. Walking in the streets takes its toll today. When things get darkest, we've got to be our brightest. We must love our hardest. That's me. Thank you very much.